This is almost humoristic. I doubt actually whether the Lord would have needed to perform in any way, but you can see the scene that he's portraying. Basically, what we find in some of our liturgical celebrations today, when we can, if we're not careful, use the church as a podium to draw attention and applause, and the tone can be nothing short of, "O Lord, how great I am." But it goes on because it concerns another worshipper here. The attitude is, or even like this, the publican. Does that perhaps ring a bell? Are we guilty of that secretly? Do we place ourselves higher by standing on someone else's shoulders? We compare ourselves with only one, Jesus Christ, the one who is called Lord in the first reading, and it makes no difference what others are at. It's before his tribunal alone that we stand. This week I was quite moved, and I mean moved. It doesn't usually happen because we become hardened, but it was deeply, deeply moving. It was the sending off of a friend, and it wasn't a funeral like others. One could hear a pin drop in the long period before Mass in a full church, right through the reverent celebration and right through afterwards. It was under the guidance of a holy priest whom maybe you know, John Hogan at Rathkenny, and it was vertical and not horizontal. But the first reading pops to mind because it concerns what happened. We tend to think that these gifts are only for the charismatic, the specially endowed. Well, actually, God is more generous with his gifts than we think. In the sacristy, before we celebrated, Father John came out with this. Pat, that was the name of the gentleman that we were burying, did his first miracle last night. He was in the church, his coffin was there, way into the night. Father John was in the presbytery. It was about 10:30, and he felt and heard objectively, strongly, and with great clarity this word: go to church. Bizarre, he thought. What's the point? However, he obeyed and went and looked in, and Pat was in his coffin quite calmly. I think the Blessed Sacrament actually was maybe exposed in the Blessed Sacrament chapel as well, because adoration goes on there day and night. But then he took one last look just outside. The boiler was on fire. He immediately rushed for help before it got into an almighty blaze, and with the help of blankets or whatever, they extinguished what would have been an inferno. One day, that same Father John had another experience of what is referred to here in the first reading as the gift of knowledge. It was a while back. He had to celebrate in midwinter, in one of the severe winters we had one of these last years, in the third of his churches, which is very high up, Grange Geath. It's near the Hill of Slane. And there's a perpendicular slope as you get up to the church, which is long, steep, and dangerous if there's frost. He got to the bottom of it. He tried, and nothing but skidding. No way. Tried again. Skidding, skidding. No way. Okay, he said to the Lord, I'm afraid I can't go any further. There would be no Mass that morning at 10 o'clock in Grangegeeth. And suddenly he heard, and it was again objective and clear in his heart, he heard this word: why do you not trust me? So he got the message, and with one almighty run-up, he kept the foot on the accelerator and zoom! Right to the top of the hill or mountain. And what was the shock of the sacristan, who didn't think there'd be any question of a celebration that Sunday morning, who saw him come up and say, "You came?" These things happen more than we think. They happen actually even on a daily basis if we have our antennae functioning, if we're humble enough to acknowledge the presence of God. This same Pat, whom we buried, told me one time what had happened when he was helping in the beginning of Silverstream. By the way, the community was there at this funeral and helping him also to die. At the very beginning, they had practically nothing, and they were depending on Providence. Dom Benedict would be sent on some errand, knowing that there was nothing to pay, there was nothing in the kitty. He would go, and before he got to his destination, someone would hand him an envelope with exactly the right amount. Another time, they had to empty skips and skips of junk as they redid the monastery from scratch. And the person responsible for these skips would have expected big money, because they were giant skips, twice or three times the size of the normal. When it was time to pay, he was asleep in bed the night before, and he had this dream, which was not like any other dream. He was given to understand this. In the dream, you are not to ask any money from that father. And so he communicated that to Don Mark just as it came to him. And again, it just happened through the providence of God, coupled with intervention from on high. The two intertwined. These are events in the lives of ordinary people. Although Don Mark was, it would seem, nudged from on high to come to Ireland to found, it would seem that he had something similar. He had to come to Ireland to found, coming very strongly in prayer. And when he went to the bishop said, "I've been waiting 20 years for a male community in my diocese." So he took that as the sign and the signature from on high. But this day is also a day on which we think of the supernatural par excellence. It is the feast day of St. Charbel Maclouf, who was beatified during the Second Vatican Council because it was important, given the tone of the Council to be universal, that this saint of the Eastern Bloc should be taken on board and made ours. He was under Rome, a Maronite, and he was beatified towards the end of the Council and made a saint in 1977 by Blessed Paul VI, a sign for our times. And during his life, because he was already doing miracles, he escaped attention by going as far as possible from the center of civilization, which was the monastery, up into the cold mountain to live as a hermit, under very severe conditions, with only one consolation, the Blessed Sacrament, and he died celebrating. But it didn't stop there. As soon as he was in his coffin, things started to happen. This miraculous oozing, which still goes on to this day, and where it goes, it heals, it heals, it heals. It was a phenomenon, and still is, of healing. And it didn't stop there either. There was no picture of this holy monk, so hidden was he. Some pilgrims went to venerate his hermitage and took a snap. And what happened when it was developed? From beyond, the man appeared on the negative, leaving us his true likeness. This is not one of the pilgrims, the one where the arrow is. It's St. Charbel after death. So these are indications of how close heaven is to earth. We think that prayer is not listened to. Well, this noisy prayer probably isn't the tone, "O Lord, how great I am." But the other one is the one that is the bottom line of all Eastern prayer. "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner." And on Monday Ethos, these are accompanied by prostrations by the 100. They will do between 100 and 1,000 a day. This gives what? An attitude of soul, not of how great I am, but to me, a sinner. One last point closely linked. It's the way that the Lord is free to act in that humble atmosphere, because one thing usually accompanies it. In the Eastern monastic life, as in the severe Western one thing is in common. The language of the soul. It is silence. The one who comes to church in noisy mode deflects grace. The one who spends his time in receptive mode, not making a noise, but receiving, is open. Where do we stand? Do we deflect, or do we take in?